Syrian air defense systems tracked and monitored an Israeli strike package as it approached Syrian airspace, identifying the aircraft types, flight paths, and weapons payload before a single bomb fell. That is not speculation. That is not propaganda. Syrian military officials went on record with specific details about what they observed, when they observed it, and what it means for the balance of power in a region where air superiority has been taken for granted for decades. Welcome to Legal Lens USA. What you are about to hear will completely change how you understand air defense capabilities in the Middle East and why Israel's long-standing tactical advantages may be eroding faster than anyone in Washington wants to admit. Before we go any further, if you are new here, hit that like button and subscribe right now because we cover stories like this before anyone else does, and we break them down in a way that actually makes sense. The Syrian Ministry of Defense issued a statement that sent shockwaves through military analysis circles across 3 continents. According to Syrian officials, their integrated air defense network detected, tracked, and identified an incoming Israeli strike package while it was still forming up over northern Israel. The statement specified that Syrian radar operators observed F-15 and F-16 fighter aircraft departing Israeli airbases, monitored their flight paths as they maneuvered into strike formation, and tracked the launch signatures of air-to-ground munitions before those weapons crossed into Syrian territory. This represents a fundamental shift in the operational calculus that has governed Israeli air operations over Syria for more than a decade. To understand why this matters, you need to understand what Syrian air defenses have endured over the past 15 years. Syria's integrated air defense system, once among the most comprehensive in the Middle East, was systematically degraded through years of civil conflict, direct Israeli strikes targeting air defense installations, and the obsolescence of Soviet-era equipment that formed the backbone of Syrian capabilities. Israeli aircraft have conducted hundreds of strikes against Syrian targets with virtual impunity, operating with such confidence that many missions were conducted in broad daylight without significant concern for defensive response. The assumption, repeated endlessly in Western defense media, was that Syrian air defenses were essentially non-functional, reduced to symbolic resistance at best. That assumption just got complicated. The Syrian statement detailed not only the detection of incoming aircraft, but the specific identification of platform types. Distinguishing between F-15 and F-16 aircraft requires sophisticated radar systems capable of analyzing radar cross-section signatures, flight profiles, and electronic emissions. This is not the capability profile of a broken, degraded air defense network limping along on outdated equipment. This is active, functional, discriminating surveillance achieving real-time situational awareness of hostile air operations. The statement went further, specifying that Syrian systems track the weapons release events themselves. Detecting the launch signature of an air-to-ground munition represents a more challenging technical achievement than tracking the launching aircraft. The munitions are smaller, travel at different velocities, and present reduced radar cross-sections compared to the fighters that carry them. Successfully tracking these weapons from launch through flight requires integrated sensor networks operating at high update rates with sophisticated signal processing capabilities. Syrian officials did not merely claim their systems worked. They provided operational details that, if accurate, demonstrate working capability at a level Western analysts have not attributed to Syrian forces in years. The technical foundation of what Syria claims to have accomplished rests on layered radar architecture operating across multiple frequency bands. Modern integrated air defense systems employ early warning radars, operating at lower frequencies that can detect aircraft at extended ranges. Tracking radars operating at higher frequencies that provide precise location data, and fire control radars that guide interceptor missiles toward their targets. The Syrian military operates, or claims to operate, Russian-supplied systems including the S-200 long-range surface-to-air missile system, the Buk medium-range system, and the Pantsir short-range system. Each of these platforms includes associated radar systems designed to operate as part of a networked defensive architecture. Here is where the story becomes strategically significant. If Syrian air defenses can track Israeli strike packages with the fidelity and advance warning described in their official statement, then the operational environment for Israeli air operations over Syria has fundamentally changed. Detection is the first step in the kill chain. You cannot engage what you cannot detect. You cannot intercept what you cannot track. Syrian officials are claiming they can detect and track Israeli aircraft and weapons with sufficient precision and advance warning to theoretically employ defensive countermeasures. The fact that they chose not to engage, if that is indeed what occurred, represents a tactical decision rather than a technical inability. This brings us to the question of Russian involvement. Syria does not operate its most sophisticated air defense systems in isolation. Russian military forces maintain a significant presence in Syria, including advanced S-400 air defense batteries and integrated radar networks far more capable than anything Syria operates independently. The Russian systems operating from Khmeimim Air Base and other facilities provide comprehensive radar coverage over Syrian airspace and surrounding regions, including Israeli airspace. When Syrian officials claim their air defenses tracked Israeli aircraft, the question immediately arises whether Syrian systems achieved this tracking independently or whether they received cueing, tracking data, or operational support from Russian networks. According to Syrian sources, the tracking was achieved through Syrian systems. However, the statement did not explicitly address whether Russian radar data was integrated into the Syrian operational picture or whether Russian personnel provided technical support, training, or operational guidance. This matters because the distinction between Syrian independent capability and Russian-supported Syrian capability has profound implications for the broader strategic environment. If Syria can track Israeli aircraft using only indigenous systems and Syrian personnel, then Israeli air superiority over Syria faces challenges that cannot be resolved through strikes against Russian facilities or diplomatic pressure on Moscow. If Syrian performance depends on Russian technical integration, then the vulnerability profile looks different, and Israeli countermeasures can be calibrated accordingly. The timing of this Syrian announcement carries additional significance. The statement emerged shortly after reports circulated of an Israeli airstrike targeting Iranian-linked facilities near Damascus. Israel has conducted hundreds of such strikes over the past decade, systematically targeting weapons transfers, military infrastructure, and personnel associated with Iranian operations in Syria. These strikes have been conducted with remarkable operational freedom, often without Syrian defensive response. Israeli aircraft have operated under the assumption that Syrian air defenses pose negligible threat. The Syrian statement directly challenges that assumption at a moment when regional dynamics are shifting rapidly. Israeli defense officials moved quickly to contextualize the Syrian claims. According to statements from Israeli military sources, their aircraft successfully completed the intended mission, striking the designated targets without incident. The Israeli position characterizes Syrian claims of tracking Israeli aircraft as routine radar contact that does not indicate any meaningful threat to Israeli operational freedom. Israeli officials emphasize that detecting aircraft is fundamentally different from successfully engaging them, and that Syrian air defenses have demonstrated neither the capability nor the will to challenge Israeli air superiority over Syrian territory. This represents the competing narrative that inevitably emerges when adversarial militaries make claims about operational encounters. Syria asserts sophisticated tracking and monitoring capability. Israel acknowledges routine radar contact while dismissing any suggestion that Syrian defenses pose meaningful operational constraints. Both narratives can contain elements of truth while serving distinct strategic messaging purposes. Syria benefits from signaling renewed defensive capability that might deter future strikes or complicate Israeli targeting decisions. Israel benefits from maintaining the perception of unchallenged air superiority that underpins its freedom of action across the region. What independent analysts can verify is limited but instructive. Satellite imagery and open-source intelligence confirm that Israeli strikes did occur in the time frame referenced by Syrian statements. Damage assessment imagery shows impact craters and destroyed structures consistent with air-launched precision munitions. This confirms the basic factual foundation that Israeli aircraft conducted strike operations and that munitions reached their targets. What cannot be independently verified through open sources is the full scope of Syrian radar tracking, the technical fidelity of that tracking, or the operational decisions Syrian commanders made regarding defensive engagement. However, there exists a data point that lends credibility to Syrian claims of improved defensive awareness. Over the past 18 months, several incidents have occurred where Syrian air defense systems engaged Israeli munitions in flight, successfully intercepting cruise missiles and glide bombs before they reached intended targets. These interceptions, confirmed through multiple sources including Israeli acknowledgement, demonstrate that Syrian air defenses retain functional capability against certain classes of threats. The technical challenge of intercepting a cruise missile or guided bomb is substantial, requiring precise tracking, trajectory prediction, and interceptor guidance. Syrian forces have demonstrated this capability on multiple documented occasions. If Syrian systems can track and engage weapons in flight, then the claim that they can track launching aircraft becomes more plausible. Aircraft present larger radar cross-sections than the munitions they carry and often operate in more predictable flight profiles when conducting strike missions. The technical leap from successful weapons interception to successful aircraft tracking is smaller than the leap from complete defensive incapacity to either capability. Syrian performance in weapons interception establishes a capability baseline that makes their claims about aircraft tracking more credible than they would be in the absence of that demonstrated performance. The strategic implications extend beyond the immediate tactical question of whether Syrian radars tracked Israeli aircraft. If Syrian defensive awareness has improved to the point where strike packages can be detected, identified, and tracked through their mission profiles, then Israeli operational planning must adapt. Predictable strike patterns become liabilities. Repeated use of the same approach corridors creates exploitable intelligence. Aircraft operating under the assumption of defensive blindness face different risk profiles than aircraft operating in environments with competent defensive surveillance. This adaptation process imposes costs. More sophisticated mission planning requires additional intelligence preparation, more complex flight profiles, greater use of standoff munitions that can be launched from outside defended airspace, and potentially increased mission durations and fuel consumption. These costs are manageable for a sophisticated air force like Israel's, but they represent friction that accumulates across hundreds of missions. Friction translates into reduced operational tempo, increased aircrew fatigue, higher maintenance requirements, and greater consumption of precision munitions inventories. Even defensive capabilities that do not achieve kills can impose strategic costs by complicating and degrading offensive operations. The broader regional context amplifies the significance of Syrian defensive improvements. Israel faces potential conflict scenarios involving Hezbollah in Lebanon, Iranian forces and proxies across the region, and potential confrontation with Iranian territory itself. Each of these scenarios involves operational environments where air superiority cannot be assumed with the same confidence Israel has enjoyed over Syrian airspace in recent years. Hezbollah operates sophisticated air defense systems supplied by Iran. Iranian territory is defended by layered networks including Russian-supplied S-300 systems and indigenously developed platforms. If Syrian defenses, long dismissed as negligible, are demonstrating renewed capability, then Israeli planning assumptions about other regional air defense threats require reassessment. The role of Russian support in Syrian defensive improvements cannot be separated from broader geopolitical dynamics. Russia maintains its military presence in Syria as part of strategic calculations that extend far beyond Syrian internal conflicts. Russian air defense systems in Syria serve multiple purposes, including protecting Russian forces, supporting the Syrian government, projecting Russian influence, and constraining Israeli operational freedom. Russian willingness to integrate Syrian forces into Russian defensive networks or provide Syrian personnel with training, equipment, and operational support directly impacts the threat environment Israeli aircraft face. Moscow has demonstrated willingness to tolerate Israeli strikes against Iranian targets in Syria while simultaneously deploying air defense systems theoretically capable of preventing those strikes. This reflects Russian prioritization of maintaining working relationships with both Israel and Iran while pursuing Russian strategic interests in Syria. However, Russian tolerance for Israeli operations is not unlimited and has boundaries that shift based on Russian perceptions of Israeli coordination, target selection, and operational impact on Russian interests. Syrian defensive capability, to the extent it depends on Russian support, becomes a lever Moscow can adjust to signal approval or disapproval of Israeli actions. The Syrian statement about tracking Israeli aircraft may represent Syria messaging its own capabilities, Russia messaging Israeli limitations, or both simultaneously. The statement serves Syrian interests by demonstrating that Syrian sovereignty is not entirely absent, even in the face of repeated violations. It serves Russian interests by signaling that Russian support provides Syria with defensive options that could be expanded or contracted based on Russian decisions. For both Syria and Russia, the statement costs nothing. It makes claims that cannot be definitively proven or disproven through open-source information while shaping perceptions about the operational environment in ways that potentially constrain Israeli freedom of action. For the United States, Syrian defensive improvements pose indirect but meaningful strategic complications. American military planning for potential contingencies involving Syria, Iran, or regional conflicts assumes Israeli air superiority as a foundational element of the strategic landscape. Israeli capabilities to conduct deep strike operations, suppress air defenses, and achieve information dominance reduce requirements for direct American military involvement in certain scenarios. If Israeli operational freedom becomes constrained by improved adversary air defenses, then American planning assumptions require adjustment, and potential contingencies that previously relied on Israeli action may require alternative approaches. This connects to the broader question of how regional air defense networks are evolving in response to decades of American and Israeli air superiority. Adversaries study operational patterns, identify vulnerabilities, invest in countermeasures, and adapt defensive architectures to impose costs on offensive air operations. Russian exports of advanced air defense systems to Iran, Syria, and other regional actors represent deliberate strategic choices designed to complicate American and Israeli military options. Chinese development of sophisticated air defense technologies creates additional supply sources for systems designed specifically to counter American air capabilities. The proliferation of capable air defense systems across the Middle East represents a long-term trend that systematically erodes the overwhelming air superiority Western forces enjoyed during the 1990s and early 2000s. Syrian claims about tracking Israeli aircraft fit within this broader pattern. Even if Syrian systems cannot currently achieve reliable kills against Israeli aircraft, the improvement in detection and tracking capability represents progress along a threat development curve that eventually produces more dangerous defensive environments. The progression from no detection to tracking to engagement to kills is not instantaneous, but it is directional. Syrian forces today may track aircraft they cannot engage. Syrian forces tomorrow may engage aircraft they cannot reliably kill. Syrian forces in the future may achieve kill probabilities that fundamentally alter Israeli operational calculations. The conflicting narratives, Syria claiming sophisticated tracking and Israel dismissing meaningful threat, create an atmosphere of strategic ambiguity that both parties can exploit. Syria signals defensive capability without the burden of proving it through actual engagement that might fail. Israel maintains deterrence posture without acknowledging constraints that might embolden adversaries. For observers attempting to assess the real operational environment, the truth likely resides between the competing claims. Syrian defenses are neither as capable as Syrian statements suggest, nor as negligible as Israeli statements imply. What remains undeniable is that the operational environment over Syria is more contested today than it was 5 years ago. Syrian air defenses have intercepted Israeli munitions. Syrian radar systems track Israeli aircraft. Russian air defense systems operate throughout Syrian territory. Iranian forces maintain presence and influence. The assumption of cost-free air superiority that governed Israeli planning for years no longer reflects operational reality. Every strike mission now operates under the knowledge that defensive systems are watching, tracking, and potentially preparing to engage. The strategic question is not whether Syrian air defenses tracked Israeli aircraft in this specific instance. The strategic question is what it means that Syria felt confident making that claim publicly, and what it signals about the trajectory of regional air defense capability development. Public statements by military forces serve strategic communication purposes. Syria chose to announce this tracking event to specify technical details and to frame it as demonstration of renewed capability. That choice reflects Syrian confidence, whether fully justified or partially aspirational, that such claims will be perceived as credible rather than dismissed as propaganda. If you are watching this and you understand what this shift in air defense capabilities means for regional military balance, for the assumptions underlying Israeli operational freedom, for the constraints emerging around American military options, then share this video right now. Click the like button. Help more people understand what is actually happening as the operational landscape in the Middle East evolves in ways that challenge decades of established patterns. This is not just about one radar track or one strike mission. This is about the erosion of air superiority advantages that have defined military power projection in this region since the 1967 war. So where does this leave us? It leaves us at a moment where Syrian air defenses, long dismissed as irrelevant, are publicly claiming sophisticated tracking of Israeli aircraft, while Israeli forces acknowledge mission success but dismiss defensive threats. Both narratives serve strategic purposes. Both contain elements that cannot be independently verified. The truth almost certainly lies between the extremes, but the direction of change is clear. Air defenses across the region are improving. Detection capabilities are advancing. Tracking fidelity is increasing. The cost-free operational environment that Israeli aircraft have enjoyed over Syria for years is becoming more contested, more dangerous, and more constrained. This is a story that is still developing, and Legal Lens USA will keep you updated as new information emerges. If this video helped you understand the real dynamics shaping air operations and defensive capabilities in the Middle East, please share it with someone who needs to see it and drop a comment below. Do you think Israeli air superiority over Syria is genuinely threatened, or is this Syrian defensive posturing without substance? Let us know what you think, because this conversation matters and your perspective matters. Syrian claims about tracking Israeli aircraft may seem like minor tactical details, but they represent data points in a broader pattern of defensive capability development that is systematically changing the regional military balance. Every military analyst, every defense ministry, every force planning cell is now absorbing what this pattern means. The answers are not clear yet. The ultimate capability levels these systems will achieve are not defined yet. But the trajectory is unmistakable. Air defenses that were written off as destroyed are tracking aircraft. Systems dismissed as obsolete are intercepting weapons. The era of unchallenged air superiority in the Middle East is not over, but the challenges are mounting and the costs are rising with every mission flown into increasingly aware and increasingly capable defensive networks.